Hi everyone, welcome to Unapologetically You, where we discuss all things health and wellness using science-backed tools that can help support you and your family. And hopefully, thought-provoking conversations will get you motivated to look after yourself and the ones you love. Now, today's podcast is without Kelly, unfortunately. She got stuck in work, and it does include a special guest called Marcus Ward. He is a strength and conditioning coach at a lead women's football team. But we digress. We do not go into his professional stance because there is a element of privacy that is required for the players, but it doesn't stop us from delving into his own wellness strategies. How does he get the best out of himself in the performance and ways that would better help him coach? But before we get into that, support what we're doing, head over to our Patreon page where you can support us for the price of a small cup of coffee. And we'd appreciate you share if you enjoyed this podcast because we are still growing this channel. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Let us know if you did in the comments box and enjoy. Hi, everyone. So Kelly was supposed to be here, but she is stuck at work. So Marcus is filling in for the gorgeous Kelly. So hi, Marcus. How are you?
Tulshi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for, joining in as a guest, but also as a co-host now. So thank you. I've just
I
put you in the
didn't
deep
sign up
end
for
now.
this.
But one of my favorite questions we do with Kelly is, what is the biggest win that you've had this week? So we're technically recording this on the Tuesday, so I would say 7 days from now, or when it was last week. What was your biggest win? Do you know?
Biggest win. Well, I went on a date, so I guess
Oh,
that was a win.
yeah,
Yeah, and it went well, and there's plans for a second. So yeah,
positive.
yeah, it's interesting because like the first thing that came to mind, but then I was also thinking about work, like what's going on at work. But
There
I've
are
been
more
told off.
questions. We could talk about work later. There's more
Yeah,
questions.
well, I've
Going
been
on
told
a
off.
date is good.
Yeah, I've been told off before. Not told off, but to not always think about work when such questions are asked. So trying to think more about the non-work life. So
That's good. Okay, so this dating environment, like I'm not dating right now and I'm happy that way. So how did you guys meet? Did you meet
um,
online? Was it
yeah,
an
it was
introduction?
no, it was online, which I used to be sort of anti online dating until a few weeks ago, where I was chatting to a couple of colleagues and well, okay, let's give it a go, see what happens. And 2 weeks later, was meeting someone from it. So.
Well done. I know so many friends have met their partners online. So, I'm not like predicting your wedding or anything, but it's a good thing. Okay, so the second question, what made you smile? You can't use the same answer, by the way.
Well, that did make me smile. It's the vague answer, probably just like enjoyment, um, happiness, but again, trying to go to another layer of what that leads to that. I was actually thinking recently, I've got a mentor, Josh lecturer. I think he sent me a task recently of listing our link to my own happiness. So things on there, like music, just listening to music, um, feeling fulfilled, like you're working towards something that's having an impact. Um, Connection with other people, time spent with other people. Yeah, I think probably a lot of it just comes back around to that fulfillment side, doing something fulfilling.
Yeah, so it's little things that are making you smile. That's a good thing. I think I always pick on Kelly and then she comes up with this elaborate story because it really reminds you about reflecting on the week and, reflecting on the past few days. Sometimes we kind of go through the motions and then we kind of forget all the good things and we remember all those bad comments or criticisms and they are few and far between, aren't they? So, okay, so this coming week. In the next few days, what is your intention? Is there a specific intention that you would want to achieve, something you'd want to accomplish besides the second date? I'm not
Um,
going to stop about that. That's the last one, I promised.
it's all good. So this is quite funny. Like last night, I did this thing. I call it like a life audit. It's only the second one I've done,
Okay.
but sort of review like a few areas of my life, like what's going
Yeah.
well and then what's not going so well, what could be going better, and then how to work on that. So yeah, so I did it last night. I'm trying to think of what some of the things that came up that I want to do better. One was around I take a little more breaks during the day. I think it's very easy, certainly at work, just to start the day and then suddenly it's 3, 4 in the afternoon and things have just blitzed through. It's now time to go home. So I think as a starting point, that might then lead on to the other stuff. Trying to be better at taking those little micro breaks in the day, even if it's just a few minutes, just to go outside, wander around, breathing exercises, those sorts of things. Because a lot of it, I feel, just trying to be more present more often. So not just to suddenly rush through the day and then suddenly we're at the end of it. So I think that'd be a good foundation is to take more breaks, be more present, and then actually.
I like that. And it's really funny because I literally did a presentation for a major company last week. And we were talking about micro breaks and the significance and the research behind micro breaks. And how are you actually, how did you begin it? Because for a lot of people, it's really hard to start a new habit because it needs to become a habit. And before you can do that, it needs to be almost it does need to be consistent, but it needs to be that reminder. So how do you remind yourself to take micro breaks? What are your tips?
Um, Simple one could be just having a timer on my phone. So when it goes off, no matter what I'm doing, right, get up, walk around somewhere. Um, Sometimes, and something I think of doing more is probably putting actually like in the calendar, in the
Mm,
schedule. Like certainly, well, there's always time in the afternoon. Pop out for a few minutes and catch a few moments. So maybe setting actually aside time properly, like we would for meetings and such. Actually set aside some time.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, simple. The timer on the phone. I think it's an easy one.
I'm so glad that you said that because for me, I've recommended to my corporate clients and the executives that I work with to put it in the calendar because if it's not in the calendar, things are just going to infiltrate and you're just going to forget about it. And the thing is, when it doesn't become a regular thing in the calendar, it can then become a habit later on. But we need to find attention to what you're doing at that point. And I'm so, so glad that you said add it into the calendar. So I think it's one of the easiest things to do, especially when you're busy. And when it's in the calendar, it's really good to go, okay, I'm supposed to do this. And even if you move it to the next day, it's still in there. And it's almost like that accountability that do you really want to move it? Or is it just easier to do it and just get it off your list? And sometimes it's the thing that we put off the most that we really do need to just get it over and done with. And we don't realize how good we'll feel after it. It's like a workout, right? We normally were like, I don't want to do it. And as soon as you finish, you're like, actually, I'm really glad that I did that.
I
Yeah.
definitely. I had I now use just the calendar on my phone, but I used to sort of create this Excel spreadsheet as like a calendar and would block in the time, at work or doing things and color code it based on, whether it's work, whether it's exercise, whether it's time with other people. And it's like you see
Mhm.
the color schemes, and if there's a lot of, say, the work color and not a lot of, say, the time with other people, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was a useful like a tip from Josh actually there to sort of help actually map it out. Yes, but obviously very good at putting meetings in the schedule and things like that. Actually seeing, I guess, how we're spending our time and like if there's been a long period without any connection time, without time seeing other people or talking to other people outside of work, then it becomes noticeable. Right? Okay, I need to make sure this week.
Yeah. I think that's a really clever way. So, people who don't know, Josh actually came onto the podcast, and that's how me and Marcus met through Josh. And Josh is coming out with very interesting ways to enhance your own wellness regarding your personal life, your professional life. Because the thing is, let's be honest, we can work our butt off in the professional life, but if we're not prioritizing our relationships outside of it, well, it's going to impact our professional life as well. It's almost like that cog, as if, or that wheel, if one part of the wheel isn't completely whole, then we're going to have depreciation in other areas. And I'm really glad that you said that color code idea. I've never heard of that. So I really like the fact that, have you got a rainbow of colors? Have you got things that you really enjoy, things that make you smile, things that you can do on your own, but also things you can do with your family and your friends and going out on a date and things like that. Just exploring and getting new connections. I feel like a lot of times I was actually in a supermarket the other day and it said how to make new friends. And I was like, well, that's a really interesting one. But it was for teens and it was just a magazine that had just been, put in front of the counter or something. So I was just obviously not on my phone, I was observing. And I found it really interesting that as adults, a lot of times, unless you move jobs, it's almost like a fear-based thing. I found for a lot of adults don't like making new friends unless they move companies. But for me, I found that I don't know how you find it as a coach, but you go to conferences, you meet different people, like, yeah, it's to do with work, but you don't initially get there and go, I'm going to make a good business connection here. You're going there to say, who are you? What do you like? And if you're not interested in them as a person, you're probably not going to work with them anyway, right?
Yeah, I think obviously if you use the example of conferences, you already have things in common. So it's a useful starting point. And easy questions are, where do you work? That where we come from. Yeah, I'm quite shy and introvert. So starting those conversations is sometimes a problem for me. I see people, oh, I really need to go and talk to them. No, they probably don't want to talk to me.
Okay, so this is a good question, actually. I want to ask you, how do you meet new people then? So besides the app, because that's a big deal. Like in terms of going on there, putting yourself out there. And let's just talk about friendships and acquaintances. Like, how do you meet new people?
So last summer, so last July, I moved places. I used to live in Nottingham, but moved out to Leicestershire.
Mhm.
Um, and part of that move, I thought, right, opportunity now to sort of. I used to work in the evenings, and that's no longer the case. So I thought, right, chance to do more sort of social things in the evenings and meet people. So yeah, I guess put myself out there. So I joined tennis club. Um, I played tennis a little bit before in life, nothing regular, but just activity to do. Joined a choir as well, way of meeting people. So I've sung before. So again, was a completely new experience. But yeah, a lot of the intention behind that, in fact, the main intention here was just to meet people and have more of a social life. So yeah, I guess that's how. Beyond that, probably nothing at the end that organises that. But organisation.
Yeah, that's a really good way of actually getting to know a new area as well. Like I know during COVID, people were doing a lot more walks. And because of that, they were like, oh, I didn't realize that this was in the area. I didn't realize that this nice place is in the area. And then you would tell each other. And it was really nice to go, all right, so how can you build a friendship? And just even going on walks, having those deeper, meaningful conversations. Because I remember us talking online, and did I get it wrong? But you don't like small talk. Is that correct?
Uh, but like, I don't want to say it's don't like. I prefer. I think what we've got to talk with like often certainly work like with people. It's usually just a quick hello, how you doing? Oh,
Yeah.
good. You don't have time per se to get into proper conversations.
Yeah.
Whereas I would much prefer the opportunities like this, the calls we've had before, where you can spend over an hour, over 2 hours just talking.
Yeah.
But you'll get a lot more from that.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so Let's go on to, I remember us actually speaking online a few weeks ago, and I was very interested in understanding your own responsibilities around wellness. Like we all, as coaches, have this element of responsibility to our players, to our teams, but we always, well, not always, that's a general statement I shouldn't make. There are a lot of coaches who don't put their physical and mental wellness first. There's a lot of mums, there's a lot of people who work in high executive positions who don't put this first. So before I ask you to delve into some wellness strategies as a coach, how did you find the line to balance player welfare and performance regarding your own performance? So like, how do you prioritize, just as you said, that color coding, how do you prioritize you being with them and also yourself?
You say have you found the way? I'm not sure I've found it yet. It's probably always a work in progress.
Okay.
But I think one big the first thing that comes to mind is one thing that's a big help is just having a personal phone and a work phone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
A simple thing like that's massive because like it's a day off today. It's nearly 10 o'clock in the morning. I haven't looked at my work phone yet. I've checked emails, but I haven't checked from there to see if there's text coming in. And just
Mm.
having a part of it is self-discipline, having that boundary, I think, to know this is the day off and there's a lot of time in the rest of the week spent working and working on you having that discipline. Um, I'll, I'll check it later today, just ahead of tomorrow, to make sure there's absolutely anything that needs addressing. Um, yeah, certainly before it hasn't been the case. Yeah, definitely haven't had that discipline, and I think it's like certainly in our profession, like when you talk about getting experience early on, and you're just throwing yourself at everything, you want to try and do everything and anything. It's priorities definitely isn't necessarily our own health and wellness. It's trying to make the most of our opportunities, most to get the most experience possible. Um, and there's definitely that lack of self discipline and lack of self care in a way, I think. Um, but now it's much better. The balance is much better addressed, and things like having more things outside of work as well.
Mhm.
So before, when I was working in evenings, there was very limited time to meet people and have more of a life outside. Because now I feel fortunate that I do have those evenings. So work during the day, focus on work, get a good job done, and then properly switch off and pursue other interests outside of work. And ultimately, it's comes down to, I think, I guess boundaries. Boundaries is probably a key word in this as well. It's um, not only trying to get other people to respect mine, but also I think it's respecting the athletes as well, because they'll be the same. They'll be having days off today where they don't necessarily think about their work. Like we necessarily don't see it as work, but essentially it is work. So yeah, respecting people's boundaries, I think, is
Yeah, that's a really good point. Healthy boundaries. And it's so funny that you raise having a separate phone because I, for a long time in high performance, didn't have a separate phone. So I was constantly checking my emails or things that would come through, and they would message me on my personal phone because that's what you connect with your own friends and family, right? And then it's really hard to distinguish between having read it but not answered it, because a lot of times I'm thinking, well, if I don't answer it now, I'm going to forget to answer it, so let me just do this, and then one thing after another. So as soon as I actually had that second phone, it was empowering for me. It allowed me to create those boundaries, and it was really, really useful because, again, why should there was I can't remember which article it was or where it was exactly, but I'm not sure whether it was New York Times or Forbes, but basically they were saying how when a person can create those boundaries, it's giving them that it's giving that fulfillment, isn't it? But it's almost like going, well, wait a second, how can you actually do that? What is your go-to regarding that? So what are your go-to wellness strategies? Because you talked about relationships and having those relationships, creating those boundaries, and also having that respect towards the other person's boundaries, right? Because sometimes people don't even know their own boundaries. So how do you go about doing that and making time for other people?
Um, I kind of have a like a list, which sounds maybe quite formal and organized, but yeah, a list of things I can do that are completely unrelated to work. So, just reading a book, um, doing it's like going for runs, going for walks. Like, fortunately, in an area which I can go for walks. I've got a marathon in a couple of months, so training for that takes up quite a bit of non-work time. Um, and other activities like that. And but also having the awareness that just like doing simple things like that, just being, say, at home and relaxing, that's still
Mm,
really important. I often might have thought, okay, it's a day off, right? I need to try and make the most. I need to go out and do this, and get these jobs done. And actually, not having a fixed plan like that and just relaxing, reading, watching something, it doesn't necessarily feel the most productive, but it's that crucial rest period. Um, like lots of days we might be working like 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, really quite intense days. Having a 1 out of 5 day where you're really just relaxed, doesn't feel like you've done much. Actually, just
mhm.
allowing the body and the mind and all that just to take a moment before going back. Probably don't fully appreciate that until the following day.
Yeah.
So yeah, not feeling I have to be going out and doing something. Sometimes me just recharging the batteries is just a quiet day in, not doing an awful lot per se. Uh,
Mm.
Sometimes that helps.
And oh, I was going to mention something and I've completely forgotten.
Oh dear.
Okay, we'll move on. There was so much to unpack in that. And I was like, there was a question and then it just completely went. Okay, so let's move on to human behavior. Oh, it was the tracking. Sorry, I was going to ask about tracking. Um, Tracking wise, do you just take how you feel per day or how much you've done accumulatively during the week, or do you have a device that you like to track your HRV or the stress and things like that? So do you use a tracking device when you work out or actually to give you enough recovery? Do you gauge it on that or just a feeling?
No, I don't have a watch or anything that does that sort of thing. I I'll track activity levels like steps, energy burn, and all that stuff, which I find quite useful just to make certainly on again days off when I'm
Yeah.
not as active, just to make sure I'm still doing something. Um, but I think a lot of the tracking is probably quite just sort of qualitative, subjective, and just journaling and
Mm-hmm.
just reflections internally of how I think I'm feeling or how I feel, how I'm doing. Attributing maybe, or if I'm feeling a bit run down or whatever, trying to identify why is that. Okay, we've had 4 or 5 quite intense working days in a row. That's maybe I feel a bit tired. Um, Now I'm feeling really good and refreshed. All right, I might have been because I had a day off there where I didn't do much and I'm feeling the benefits now.
Yeah.
So not like not quantitatively tracking things, probably
Mm-hmm.
more constantly checking in with myself. See how I'm
And
doing.
that's a really good thing to have that internal cue because I think a lot of people have lost that mind-body connection.
Mm. Yeah, I think I, I think self-awareness is huge. Like it's the foundation and underpinning of so much. And something I massively value. Um, Trying to do is just to be self-aware of feelings and thoughts and stuff.
Mm, mm,
A lot of things after that.
yeah. And this does relate to that human behavior aspect because it's almost like, well, how can you know other people if you don't really know yourself? And I know that Kelly and I, we both love this aspect of coaching, like the psychology behind it. So where did that come from for you? Like, did you study it or did you just like how did you get better at the psychology of sport or performance athletes? And then did it have a knock-on effect on you?
I don't think I've ever like formally studied it. Um, One thing my mum says is I think because I'm quite quiet and introverted, maybe more aware of other people. It's not to say
Mm,
necessarily people aren't introverted, I completely relate to other people. But I think I'll be, because I'm quiet, I'm sort of more observant of other people. Sometimes get a sense, like certainly when young, at school in class of 20 people, so I'm definitely not one of the louder ones, so you can sort of see other people, maybe how they're behaving.
Mhm.
So it's probably just been quite an informal just experience of life, just watching other people, and it's sort of accumulated over time, maybe. And being quite aware of maybe how other people seem and sort of the general um, vibe they're putting out, if that makes sense, or how they seem to be feeling. Um, and then nowadays, yeah, say at work, someone I think walks in gym or wherever, you can start to get a sense maybe of how they're feeling just from how they're walking or just the general interaction. Like when you say hi, how do they say hello back? Is it usual? Is it a bit more energetic? Is it a bit quieter? So, as you say, it's a really interesting one in work we do. Yes, more about the physical performance and improving that. But the psychology part is massive, and I definitely have like a hobbyist's interest in it, like an amateur's interest in it. I would have covered it at uni, like many sports science courses, but never gone into great detail on it. But some of the books I've read as well, I've read as well about, um, I think, like you said, understanding yourself and then trying to understand other people maybe too. You start with yourself and then you maybe notice things in other people. But yeah, it's a huge part of what we do, understanding people and learning what motivates them, getting on board with what you want them to do, what you think is best for them. Um, and it goes back to what we said earlier about going beyond that small talk. It's those deeper conversations, not necessarily speaking to an athlete for an hour, but
Mm.
in 5 minutes or so, you can get more into what motivates them, ticks their boxes and everything. Instead of,
Yeah, and if you don't have those buckets of hours, it's almost like, well, you get 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there and 5 minutes there. And I don't know about you, Marcus, but for me, if you've only got 5 minutes, well, that's going to take a little bit longer to get to know my player, the athletes, the team, whatever it is. But I feel that that's just with everyone, right? You can strike up a conversation and speak for an hour, but for other people, it could be a series of conversations over years. And that's how you get to know that person, because it really does depend upon how you're drawing yourself out, how you're drawing them out, and what where you are in your own life. Because a lot of times, I don't know about you, but for me in particular, it was difficult for me to be vulnerable because I thought that was a weakness. And luckily, society is not deeming that as a weakness anymore. There's a lot around mental wellness and mental support, but that wasn't the case when I was younger or when I was coming up through the field of sports and coaching. And I feel like sometimes, even in the sports arena and performance, that sometimes gets bypassed. But what are your feelings around it? Like, how did you become a little bit more vulnerable to your players and allow them to be vulnerable with you? But it doesn't even need to be players, it could be people, right? General people, relationships.
I think it came back to me being more authentic. Um, so going back, when I was at uni undergrad, I had a year's placement working with the football team, and there was a sports scientist there who sort of worked under. He didn't really show much emotion at all. Like, lovely guy, really good guy. He was probably just more contained, didn't necessarily, um, yeah, express much emotion. So, being my first experience in that environment, I thought, okay, right, that's maybe the sort of vibe I need to give if I'm in that sort of role. But fast forward a year later, when I'm then working with um, team by myself, working with the women's team, I sort of really like put on this act in a way of being not cold, but just being really quite reserved and not really expressing much, not really giving much away, like doing my job, but not really getting too much detail on things. Thinking, right, that's how he was, so I need to be like that. Um, and then I joined this team like a few months before the end of the season. Then fast forward to the start of next season, I was still with this team. There's a few changes around some coaches and players. And I think it was part of the environment that was created by this new coach and the players. Yeah, that became like a real family feel environment, and I think that maybe then helped me settle, and ultimately came back to me being more authentic. Of like, okay, I do feel like emotions and feelings. I'm quite emotive like that. I don't necessarily would express it
Mm,
or show it or share it with people because again goes back to that being shy. But I do feel these things, and that probably then lent more to that vulnerability and understanding more that okay, if I share more about me, then yeah, it might help that rapport with the player. By being more human, not just being like the working version of me. And it did help that yeah, this team was a really good group of people. We all got along well and it was very cohesive. And it was like a family, so that helped massively probably in terms of that. And then when I've moved on, again, new environment, probably little bit cautious to begin with, but ultimately, certainly now feel like I can just be me, uh,
yeah.
which is can be authentic, which is huge. Like going back to one of the other questions about happiness and then things, that fulfillment. If I don't couldn't if I felt like I couldn't be authentic or felt like would be judged for it or whatever, then
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have that element of fulfillment.
And it's a really hard boundary to have with, again, I was reading something else and it talked about how we shouldn't treat our colleagues as friends and clients as friends, because at the end of the day, it's really hard to establish that boundary with friends, let alone work colleagues. And then a lot of times we end up mixing those relationships, and it can cause ruckus regarding a project or a situation. So I feel like there's a hard line. For some people, they just cannot do it, and that's completely understandable. For others, they've already infiltrated that area and their work colleagues are their friends, or they've become, great friends. I found that if I left an organization and I'm still friends with those people, then that friendship was actually valid and there was some substance to it. Whereas I was very much that person. See, even at the beginning, when you said you were probably a little bit more reserved, and I've been like that with work because I feel like there needs to be a border or boundary, because otherwise it can get a little bit muddy and then impact your own performance, which we talked about right at the beginning. Everything can impact your own performance and your wellness. So it's trying to find that balance. And I feel like everybody's kind of learning as they go along anyway, right? Everybody's just making it up.
Absolutely, we're all learning as we go.
Exactly. So you mentioned books, and I remember you and I were talking offline about self-help books. And personally, I love them. I find it fascinating to discover ways that I can improve as a person, but also as a coach. And so, why are you interested in this area? Is that something that you have been kind of delving into about the genre that you're interested in, or do you have any current favorites?
Um, I don't know about so I think it's probably the last few years I've read them.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm trying to think. I think the first one came about from listening to a podcast and the guest on there um having a book out. It was interesting what he was saying. It was Ryan Holiday. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
book was The Obstacle Is the Way. I think that was probably the first self-help book I think I've read. And then I think, yeah, it's just gone on from there. And it's, as I think you said it there, it's how can I improve myself? But then obviously there's a lot of links to what we then do at work as well. So yeah, I've read a few on since then, like the How to Win Friends and Influence People, yeah, on Iggy. I'm looking over there because the books are over there. So I can't quite feel the titles. The Chimp Paradox,
Yeah.
Steve Peters, ones like that. Um, Happiness Within. Apparently, that's quite a good book.
Yeah.
Read, I've heard reading through that at the moment. I also read the is it Emotional Intelligence, Daniel Coleman.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one. No.
Quite, yeah, it was quite a intense read.
Yeah.
Um, but I really like that sort of emotional intelligence. Really quite again, especially that self-awareness thing. I think it's massive. So yeah, like books like that, just you pick up these odd gems
Mm.
that then take like into life. And I think there's probably some things I do now which I picked up in a book and actually don't remember or don't realize it came from that. Uh,
Okay.
but always get excited when you just come across something. Oh, didn't think of that. And it's probably the same for like podcasts these days, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
got things which like, oh wow, that little phrase or that perspective on something is huge. Like podcasts have been just as big. Podcasts and books have both been equally big for me on this it's like this journey almost, isn't it? Self development and discovery really. So yeah, there are a few.
And I feel like, I don't know about you, but podcasts are easier because a lot of times not everybody has the capacity to sit down and read, but you can go for a walk or train and listen to a podcast. I know one of the players that I actually used to work with, he used to listen to a podcast whilst working out. And for me, who's a stickler about technique and thinking about my form, that for me was mindfulness. So I was like, okay, what are my feet doing? What is my body doing? What am I tensing? What is the rep I'm doing? How many reps am I doing? Because even the people I coach will say, Tulsi, got it wrong. I always tell them to do extra. But I think for me, listening to a podcast and then working out, I'm like, well, then I'm not paying attention to either one of them. But for some people, it works. And I feel like if you have the capacity to do something like that, like I will listen to something while I'm cooking, which is something that I really enjoy doing. But then it's like how to absorb those things. They may not be relevant right there and then there. And it might be relevant a little bit more down the line. And it's just that ease of information, isn't it? But again, we need to create our own boundary between how much information we can take in, right?
Yeah, definitely. That for me, the podcast is probably more on walks. Just going for a
Yeah.
walk, tuning in, like setting up a good listening to a walk, depending on the length of the podcast. And I did one yesterday, and it's great. Sort of getting some exercise, taking all this information, and yeah, it's really good.
Um,
Sorry,
Sorry, I
go
was going to say, what are your favorite podcasts? What are your favorite go-tos at the moment?
on. The one I've maybe taken most. There's a few. It varies. Like it started with the. Well, it's properly started way back with. It was called "Don't Tell Me the Score" with Simon Monday. It's changed now. It's now he's called it something else. I can't remember what it's called now. I haven't listened to it for a while, but that was like the first one I listened to. That was where the Ryan Holiday one was. Then went through. There's the High Performance podcast that came out. So that was quite. Well, still is very very big. And then there was an episode on there with Johnny Wilkinson, which I think is one of the biggest ones from a couple of years ago. That was a yeah. I took a load from that. I've listened to that 3 times, and that was a bit of a like a bit of a spark as well for me. Really,
What
really.
what were the epiphanies that you were
Um,
getting?
again, like the perspective he had on things of seeing things quite objectively from and just being aware more of our own perception of things. Um, and the idea of exploring as well, like it's something he's mentioned quite a lot is about exploring. That's something I feel it's quite important, exploring both self and the world as well. But so yeah, that idea of perspective of what I might see as really good, you might not see as really good. It doesn't mean one of us is right or wrong, but just again that perspective of how we see things. So yeah, a few big things from that. And then he's got his own podcast series as well called I Am. And some of the guests he's had on there, again, just really massive, meaningful, deep conversations, which take a load from. Um, so yeah, quite a few from probably the main ones. I've listened to a bit of Rangan Chatterjee's podcast.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
I listened to the one yesterday with the Auschwitz survivor. Just yeah, very very powerful. Um, so they're probably the main ones from that perspective.
Hmm.
To listen to a few Diary of a CEO podcasts, which wouldn't necessarily be seen as self help, but again, just conversations they have with people. Really enjoy just having that open, honest conversations that they have.
Yeah, and I remember when I first started listening to, say, more self-help podcasts or more people who were in the health and wellness industry. And I'm talking not about sports coaching, but more about health and wellness coaching. But it was like Jay Shetty is one of my favorite podcast hosts, and I feel like a lot of the podcasts get famous people on because they want to draw out their struggles and things like that. But it's almost like everybody has their own perspective of the struggle, their own experience. And I'm not sure about you, but you say you journal a lot. I do too. But it's almost like, did you, because I first wrote notes on podcasts, and so I feel like sometimes it's not a thing of I need to look back on this and review it, but it's almost like it helps me digest it a little bit more, and I may not understand why, but it's almost like, okay, I'll put it in the bank and it may serve me later on. Is that something that because you say you journal a lot, do you make notes on what you're listening to and what you're reading, and the reflection on how it impacts you?
Um, Not so much now. I've listened to a few times. I've listened to podcasts, and I might have listened to it the first time and thought, "Oh, right, I need to listen to this back and make notes," or make notes there, and then depends what I'm doing. Like, we sat down, won't necessarily be up and walk. But nowadays, I haven't done that for a bit, and now in the journal, it's probably more if I've listened to something during the day or read something during the day,
Mm,
make a note of it when journaling and sort of what I feel about that, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah, I haven't not so much these days. We go set aside time to write down. Maybe because I now do the journal, I haven't thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, before we close, I just want to ask one big question. So, this is our next phase of the podcast. And I always ask Kelly when she's here what her health motivational tip of the day is. Now, it could be anything that you've already spoke about, or it could be something completely different. So, for all of our audience who are listening, thank you so much. Make sure you hit subscribe and like because we are still growing the channel. But, Marcus, what is your number one health motivational tip of the day?
One that's come to mind recently. I thought this a while ago and reminded myself yesterday. Instead of asking what if, ask what now.
Okay.
So if worried about say, things in the future, and what may be, what might be, what ultimately future doesn't exist yet.
Mhm.
So just ask what now, what can be done now. I don't know if that's a health tip to say, but
No, it is.
let's
And
not get
to
started.
kind of break that down, for my understanding, it's saying, reiterating, we can't predict the future. We're not fortune tellers. We have no idea what's happening, but we can change our future by focusing on the right now. So if we want to change the future, we focus on right now. So it's kind of going back to that present moment. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
what can I do now?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you sometimes think of is like laying bricks. Like say you want to build a house, you don't suddenly build a house overnight. It's laying a brick one at a time, and over time you get there. It's the way I
Yeah.
like to see it. But yeah,
Baby steps, brick by brick.
baby steps, brick by brick.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Marcus. I know that you are a coach, you are incredible at what you do, and we didn't really speak about that because we respect your team's privacy. So if you did want to get in contact with Marcus, we will have his details in the description box, so feel free to get in contact with him. If you are interested in elite team sport coaching or anything about health and wellness, and be Marcus's new friend because he's open to that too, which is really good. But thank you so much, Marcus, for taking time out and being here today. And for those of you who are listening, if you found this podcast useful, share it with a friend. Let us know if this was something that you valued and you want more of. Share it with your family and friends, and be a part of our community on Patreon. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for being here. Click subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future podcasts. I hope you've enjoyed this new podcast. And Marcus, thank you again for being here and filling in for Kelly at the same time.